And hello once again, my name is Lupus, and today I'm going to be talking about a sign in the theatre. This doesn't mean like signs like a stop sign, but sign as in a semiotic sign. Very, very fun stuff. So before we get into it, let me just say that if you appreciate these videos that I make, and I've made quite a lot of these videos, you can support my work by checking out my Patreon or buying my books. Whatever you want, and if you don't want to, that's fine. But for now, we're going to continue on with the video. So let's talk about the sign. First off, what is a sign? Just as a very, very basic term, a sign is a semiotic sign. That's what we're talking about here today. And semiotics is a specific theory that is basically about how to identify meanings within symbols of various descriptions. So symbols and images that basically represent something else. What do they represent? It is fundamentally representative. So that is why the sign in the theatre is actually such a big thing, because, as I say here in quotes, all that is on the stage is a sign. A sign, there are many different theories of the sign, and if you want to find various semiotic models, I have made videos already that are on the channel that you'll be able to find that looks over Ferdinand de Saussure's semiotic model, Umberto Eco's semiotic model, Persian semiotics, basically a whole bunch of different semiotic models that you'll be able to find if you are looking for them. But today, let's first say, why is the sign so important in the theatre? Okay, so remember that the sign is a thing that is represents something else. Okay, so remember when you look at, say, an image, say a warning sign. I'm talking about an actual sign like on a building, right? And that sign has a little symbol that looks like a flame, right? Which means flammable. Something can catch on fire. Okay, when you see that sign itself is not fire. It is a representation of fire, which tells us that the thing that we are looking at can catch on fire, right? It represents something else. So this is why I say representativeness is key. And in the theatre, everything is a sign, because everything represents something else. The actors on stage are not being actors. They are pretending to be characters. They're turning themselves into living signifiers that can represent the signified of a character. A person on stage is not actually Romeo. A person on stage is playing Romeo. They are representing Romeo. So also the clothes they wear are not actually clothes. They are an outfit. They're a costume. They are made to look like something the character would wear, not something the actor would wear. Think about when you go to like a lot of traditional sort of Shakespearean plays, they're usually wearing the kinds of things that are inspired by 16th century fashion, because that is the period that led to the creation of that particular play. You know, the works of William Shakespeare were from that period, which means that nothing is necessarily real on stage. Everything is representative of something else. So this is why we get into the idea of connotative versus denotative elements, right? The connotation is something more metaphorical, or something implied. Denotative is something that is real. It's easiest to think of it in terms of language because you can just translate it. Denotation is the actual dictionary definition of a word. Connotation is what that word means, right? So think about something like red. The word red. The word red, from a denotative sense, means a color. It is a warm color. You know, it's on that side of the color wheel, whatever. Red, it's actually not a primary color, but whatever. You know, so basically, that is the denotative meaning. However, by just reading that, you don't actually know what red looks like. You know what red looks like because you know what it looks like, but the connotation of red isn't just that it's a color. Red represents something. Red can represent blood. It can represent war. It can represent love. It can represent passion. It can represent danger. These are all connotations of red, both the word and the color. They are representations of those things, right? So when you look at on a stage for a play, the connotation and the denotation. So the denotative element would be, you know, there are people wearing clothing. There are human beings on the stage. There is a set that has been built. There is a stage. These are all denotative. They are physical things you can touch, you can feel. They are there. The connotation is what they represent. The stage isn't actually there. When you are watching a play, there are people who defy the concept of suspension of disbelief, but generally speaking, when you're talking about this kind of stuff, you'll say there is a suspension of disbelief, right? So when you sit in a theater and you watch a stage, the stage is not actually a stage. The stage is just wherever the characters are. So they might, for instance, be a chair and a table on a stage. However, the chair and the table represent chairs and tables in the story. They're not actually like there necessarily. And sometimes, especially in something like poverty theater, things represent things that they are not. You might have, for instance, a chair, but a person will sit in a chair, hold their hands out, and pretend to be driving a steering wheel. In that case, denotatively speaking, the chair is a chair, but connotatively speaking, the chair is a car. It changes what it is based on the context, right? It is connotative. It is now something that is representative of something else. This also means the sign, and the performance sign especially, is very dynamic. The performance sign can change. It depends on the context. Different performances can mean different things. They can represent different things. Now, basically, to go over the sign in theater, now if you want to have a real in-depth look at the sign in general, I would recommend going and looking at those other videos which go over these models in much, much more depth. There are also going to be a couple other videos about theater, basically right after this one. This is the first of the theater ones, and then there's going to be other ones about different parts of the theater. This is just about sort of the sign. We're going to look at 3 different, basically, models for understanding the sign. First, Peircean semiotics. Now, Peircean semiotics makes use of iconic signs, indexical signs, and symbolic signs. Now, we're not even going to look at Saussurean semiotics because basically Saussurean semiotics is not really as often applied necessarily to theater because Saussurean semiotics is inherently symbolic. Basically, all the signs in Saussurean semiotics is symbolic signs. We're going to be looking at signs that are more related to visual imagery. So that's why you get iconic signs, indexical signs, symbolic signs. Okay, and we're going to talk about them also with relation to theater. Now, a iconic sign is something that has a direct relationship between the thing that is shown and the thing that is represented. So, let us imagine you go to the theater and there is a person wearing clothing. I know, ridiculous. Imagine a person wearing clothes. They are clothes, yes. However, those clothes, as I said before, you go to a Shakespearean play and they're wearing, those puffy outfits that they wore with the thing sticking out your neck that I can't remember the name for, right? And the big tufts hanging out of the wrists and everything. It's all very flamboyant and ridiculous. Okay. Those outfits are not actually 16th century outfits. They are ones that were probably made last weekend, but they basically represent something that looks exactly like it. It is a direct relationship. Clothing representing clothing. Crazy, I know. But remember, now the reason you might think, well, obviously the clothes are clothes. The thing is, the clothes represent clothes that they are not. Yes, those are clothes, but remember, they're not actually 400-year-old clothes. They were probably made this year, and they represent clothes that were made 400 years ago. They represent ancient clothes because they look like it, or they're made to look like what you think they're supposed to look like. Indexical signs, on the other hand, there is an indirect relationship. So iconic, it looks like the icon, right? Indexical, it is related to the thing, right? So usually the thing that they always talk about when it comes to indexical signs, the easiest way to explain it is something like an image of fire is iconic, right? Because you see a picture of fire. Fire represents fire. Insane. Whereas indexical would be there's a representation of smoke, an image of smoke. But a smoke, a pillar of smoke represents fire. So it is not fire, but it comes from fire. It has a relationship with fire, an indirect relationship with fire, in the sense of semiotics. Obviously, there is a direct relationship between fire and smoke in the real world, but I'm talking about in terms of semiotics. So, on a stage, right, iconic, it is the thing, it represents the thing. Indexical, it looks like the thing, it represents something else. So imagine a cardboard cutout of a car. Now you're supposed to sit there and go, okay, it's a crudely made cardboard cutout of a car, but obviously it represents a car. It basically has some kind of a similarity. You could also say something like with the sitting in a chair, right? Cars have chairs. They have seats. Car seats. They don't look like the kind of chairs that you would just find at like a dinner table, but they are chairs. So you could say, oh, I see it's not actually a car chair, but it looks like, a chair, and cars have chairs. So therefore there's this indirect relationship between them. Symbolic signs are purely arbitrary. There is no actual visual relationship between the thing and what is represented. Symbolic signs are things that represent something because you know it does. The thing that they always bring up in terms of like explaining this is religious symbols, right? When you look at Christianity and the cross, there is nothing about the cross that says Christian. The only reason that you know it means Christianity is because you know the story behind the crucifixion, which led to it being used as the symbol for Christianity. That is the only reason. It isn't because, like, that's why imagine someone who has never heard of Christianity and they see the cross, they will never once think to themselves, that represents Christianity. They don't know what Christianity is, they just think it's geometry. They just think it's a cross. So, symbolic signs are purely arbitrary. And those can be basically all over the place. You can have symbols on a stage that represent something completely unrelated. Okay, so that's basically Percy and semiotics. Then you get Cousins classifications. Now these are signs that are kind of self-explanatory about what they are. Now we're going to look at two main types, auditive and visual, and also actor versus non-actor. So basically, an auditive sign is one that is sound-based. It comes from sound. Whereas visual is obviously, you can see it. Those are the two types of signs you're going to get. I just hiccuped. Many apologies. So, an auditive sign is something that's you can hear, visual you can see. And that's because theatre is made up of things you can see and things you can hear. You can't really touch the actors. That's usually, frowned upon. Don't go on stage and touch an actor unless it's part of the performance. But it's not usually. So touch is not usually a thing, right? Smell is not usually a thing. I suppose you could incorporate smell into a theatrical production, but I have not seen it personally. But you could. But generally speaking, there's going to be auditive and visual, and then actor versus non-actor. So obviously actor are things that the actor does, and non-actor are things that the actor does not do. So they're actually very, very simple, right? When it comes to auditive things, the actor can do words, they can say words, and they can choose a specific tone. They can be very, very angry about their tone, or they can be very jovial about their tone. Very happy about their tone. They can be really sad about You see, you can say the exact same thing. I want to go to the shops. That's very neutral. I want to go to the shops. That's angry. I want to go to the shops. That's sad, right? The tone can change the meaning of those same words. So words and tones. Whereas non-actor things are things like music and sound effects. When you play music, right, different types of music evoke different feelings, right? If you have something that's like dum 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 dum, it has this beat to it. Whereas if it was that, you might think, oh, that's sad. Something sad is going to happen. And then sound effects are also things that represent something that is not there, right? When you hear a gunshot sound effect, it's not actually a gun going off. It's a sound effect that is made to sound like a gun. Okay, so those are auditive. Then you get visual. When it comes to the actor, they can mime things. You know what miming is, right? A mime. Gesturing, you can wave. Hello? Yes, yeah. Movement, you can move around the stage. But remember that these things are representative of something else. When a character waves, or when an actor waves, they are being the character who is waving. So it's basically there's a level of disconnect between the person and the fiction. In that sense, the same with movement and everything. Then when it comes to non-active visual things like the makeup. Why is the makeup used to evoke something specific? Think about especially when it comes to something, I don't know, you get like Phantom of the Opera, where one of the characters, the Phantom, basically is disfigured, I think. I don't know it very well. But I think he's facially disfigured. He has injuries. So you would use makeup to do that, to represent something else. You could also have hairstyles. How do you do your hair? How do you do your costumes? What accessories do you have? Also, what is the lighting like in this play that is being done? What is the decor? What is the set design? Why does it look like that? Each of these things are possible signs that you can look at because they all represent something else. All right, so that's Carlson's classifications. The last one we're going to look at is Umberto Eco's communication model. Basically, he looks at it from a much more sort of typical sense. This is Umberto Eco's model is much more closely related to the Saussurean semiotics. So when you look at this, right, you will see that there is the sign in the middle. The sign is the thing, right? But the sign is made of various things. There's the source, wherever it comes from, which then moves through the sender, which will be the person saying it, which then becomes a sign, right? Which then goes through a channel to basically create another sign, which is comprised of noise, which then goes to a receiver. So that would be like the audience, who will then receive the message, and then that basically becomes the destination of the final communication. Whereas then also there is a code, and the codes are comprised of basically multiple different elements. But to really go in depth into Umberto Eco's communicative model, I would recommend the video that goes really, really in depth into it. But basically, just think of on a stage, right? Everything is oriented around this communication process. There are actors who are pretending to be characters, who are saying and doing things that is then being communicated to an audience, which is receiving and internalizing it. Okay, that is how it goes. So the message in that case would be, like the thing, the play itself is being made by people and consumed by people at the same time. There is a communication process going on between these two groups. And yeah, so that's basically what I'm going to talk about here in terms of the sign in theater. There is obviously more when it comes to semiotic models, and if you want to learn much more about various semiotic models, you can look at all of those videos that go much more in depth into them. I've already done those, so you'll be able to find those very easily on the channel. I must actually also put everything into playlists to make it easier to find. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to finish off there. So if you did enjoy this, or if you learned something from it and you're interested in supporting me, you can support me on Patreon or check out my books, whatever you'd like. And if you don't want to, that's fine. Or, of course, you can do a like and a comment and a subscribe. All of those are very, very helpful. So, yeah. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day, week, and month ahead, and goodbye.